Hello, US 101 history class. So I'd like to just go over a summary of some of the assignments that we've been doing and thinking about where we're going as we build up to coming up to the US Civil War and Reconstruction and basically the end of this course for the semester, which is really just everything is just moving with lightning speed at this point, right? So first of all, we talked about before this section, we learned a lot about the Mexican-American War, how important it needs to be integrated into U.S. history because it also expands the question of slavery, which is many of you talked about in the discussions and you covered in your video notes. And then also for our discussions and also some of what you covered and was the fact that indigenous people, communities within the borders of what was defined as Mexico and of the United States were also major players in this in their own right too, so that we don't have just the United States and Mexico, but we have them mixed with various tribes fighting for their own territory and they're having their own sets of interests, right, as actual players involved in this. And then what we do is we look into a slave revolt, Nat Turner's Rebellion, and reflect on how this gets, how we fit this into the history that we're moving into. One of the things that Howard Zinn does, and I think a lot of you pointed this out in your discussions recently, right, is that in the enslaved, the people that are enslaved in the United States, still you see that they find ways to resist it. They're not passive in this story as well. And so again, I kind of just want to remind you of by integrating the indigenous, the native history into our discussions, and by looking at the idea that those of African ancestry that become enslaved in this institution, this totalitarian institution that the United States, implements, are not passive. And we see with Nat Turner, yes, a very also opening up a very complicated discussion, or maybe some consider complicated, the idea of violence and what to make of something where, when we see that an infant, for instance, or a child is killed in a revolt or a war, we rightfully have to pause and go, what's going on here? But he also shows with this rebellion that, that we have, when you have an institution that's set up that is violent, it itself is violent, right? The enslaved don't have access to their children's rights. Their children can be snatched away from them. Their children can be put in working conditions that could take their lives early. A husband and wife can be married and forcefully be separated. The master can assault another enslaved person's wife or him, and there's no recourse. Whatever they own your bodies, and so by owning your body, their bodies, that in and of itself is a perpetual set of violence that takes place every day. And then when Nat Turner then, and his rebellion does this really graphic, takes a sword and starts hacking up people and even kids, the terrible violence of the arrangement becomes visible. But the focus then gets put on them as if this just comes out of nowhere, right? And so instead of actually resolving this or expanding for me to talk about the whole question about political violence and liberation and the idea of all of that, one thing I will just say this is that one person pointed out to me many years ago. He said, the oppressors in any given situation always dictate the rules of how the oppressed are supposed to fight back. And that's something that we have to like question, and think about. But again, it's tragic. And what I want to focus on also, though, is the fact that we're seeing through Zen's coverage and through this documentary, and I looked at in your discussions that you had on him, you're seeing that that the enslaved are agents for their own well-being, or they are reacting or trying to break free of this institution. And also we saw in Nat Turner's Rebellion the fact that even the story that he told about himself was controlled by others. We don't know for sure if the journalist coming in and doing the interviews was embellishing or making up the entire thing that he was doing, or and then we have other writers who kind of try to imagine and tell the story about him. And so that ultimately, as somebody who was resisting this terrible institution, Nat Turner's actual self and his story, he never owns for himself. He never gets to articulate for himself, and that's part of the added tragedy of this whole set of circumstances here. Now, while you're looking at that, we're going to follow up on a rebellion against slavery, a violent one, where we again question the issue of violence. But this time it'll be with John Brown, a white Christian man who's going to take up arms, and he's going to commit some, what people would say, violent atrocities to fight this violent system of slavery. And all I'll say here is, as I'm looking at all of your discussions and feedback on, what I want all of you to kind of like focus on and think about is that in the United States, there's still a debate of whether or not the U.S. Civil War was mainly about slavery. And as we go over it, I'm going to, I think you know what direction I'm going in with this on spoiler alert. But here we're seeing that slavery is in full effect already. The violence and the conflict is already there. Slavery is a fundamental problem that will have to get resolved one way or the other. And you'll especially notice that when we cover the information going into this week. So I'll be paying attention to your discussions and looking at your, what you're drawing from the video notes. But think about all of that, and we'll keep reflecting on all of this. And outside of this grim topic, I hope that you're having a good week and staying warm and cozy on this rainy weekend. So we'll be in touch. Have a great week.